Warmest greetings. You've tuned into Crossroads Coven Connections, where faith meets magic. I'm Amber Mayer from Manitoba, Canada.
And I'm Sarah Christine from Chicago, USA. We are practicing witches and Reiki masters who view the magical and mundane world with an Abrahamic lens.
Today, we are going into discussing a big topic for Christian witches and the witchcraft community as a whole, the misconceptions that surround witchcraft.
Yeah, so both of us, I'm sure, being from a Christian background from our childhood, my Facebook is filled with Christians just, like, saying the most bizarre things about witches. And I'm like, you just really do not understand what any of this is. So, yeah, this podcast is not only, or this episode is not only great for Christian witches, it's great for pagan witches and people who aren't witches at all, who just don't understand witchcraft as a whole. So the first one, and the one that I see the most, is that witchcraft is inherently evil or satanic. The misconception is that many people associate witchcraft with dark forces or the worship of Satan, particularly because of historical witch hunts and religious narratives. The reality of it, though, is that witchcraft, especially in modern practices, even with Wicca, like not even just Christian witchcraft, but even with Wicca, or other forms of paganism, it's typically centered on nature worship, healing, and spiritual growth. It's not about causing harm or worshiping a devil figure.
Absolutely. And of course, like you had been saying, the historical witch hunts and religious narratives, they were antagonizing witches because witches were, as you said, they were empowering people through healing, through teaching them how to heal themselves and to grow spiritually. They were empowering people in a way that politics and religion couldn't. And that could not happen. That was a bad thing for the church back then and for politics in general. So what happened? They had to cut off that source. They had to cut off that energy. And thankfully in this modern day, we're really seeing a growth in witchcraft with the, of course, age of Aquarius that's been ushering in now. And it's been so beautiful to see people just following that path again and bringing in that healing and nature connection. Because even as a Christian witch, you can access that energy. That's why I kind of prefer the term Abrahamic druid, because druids are very centered around nature and embracing connection of the divine through what we have all around us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think another thing too about this before I move on to the next topic, when it comes to that connection to Satan, I mean, of course we know there are Luciferian witches. That is the thing. They have their own divine right to practice as they wish. But I find that people always focus on the extremists. They always focus on the absolute far case scenario. For example, they think that all Nordic practitioners still, do animal sacrifices. That's not the case. There are a lot of Nordic practitioners that do not do that. But there's also really incredibly religious extremists, like we know Westboro Baptist. We know a lot of those scary names that are making Christianity look bad. So there are going to be extremists or people that are out there in your realms of understanding, outside of your realms of understanding, in every single religion, spirituality, and walk of life. Another misconception about witchcraft is that witches have supernatural powers or can perform magic at will. And this is really caused by a lot of movies and TV shows like Harry Potter, a lot of those different things where we can cast spells or summon supernatural forces on command. But in reality, most practitioners of witchcraft view spells as a way to focus intention and energy. Magic in many traditions is seen as a way to influence change, but it does not grant the ability to control reality in the exaggerated way often depicted in media. We're not Yennefer out here causing a massive forest fire, okay? You can manifest something like that to occur, but there isn't going to be flames pouring out of your hand and hitting a tree. That is very cinematized and kind of gives this fantasaical view of how witchcraft works.
Right. And one thing that I find so interesting about the intersection of witchcraft and Christianity is the patience that both require, right? Like, you ask God for something, you're not going to get it right away. More times than not, he's not going to, like, here's your $1,000 that you asked for. And same with witchcraft, right? Like, we can do a money spell and manifest and ask for that money, but, like, it's not going to come to us in a blink of an eye. And I think that's a really interesting, like I said, intersection between the two.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that something supernatural can't happen. I mean, there have been amazing, amazing things that do occur through witchcraft and Christianity, right? I've seen people literally get up from wheelchairs, and I myself have experienced extreme healing. I even know somebody that spoke to a tornado and it ripped in half and went around them and then recollided, went kind of almost like Red Sea stuff. That's not to say it can't happen, but the odds of it happening, like, there's a reason we call it supernatural. This isn't something that occurs on a very regular basis. This is why the Bible also encourages us to remember miracles that have happened for us, because guess what? They don't happen every single day. That's why they're called miracles.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So another misconception is that all witches are women. Even in media, like in Harry Potter, for example, it's witches and wizards. Like, it's not
or
all
warlocks.
Right, or warlocks. So yeah, the term witch is often extremely gendered, with the stereotype that witches must be women, especially in folklore and historical accounts. But in reality, while women were historically targeted in witch hunts, people of all genders can practice witchcraft. If you don't want to be called a witch, that's fine. I know that warlock is used, like you said, sometimes for male witches. It is kind of a bit of an outdated term. And I do know some male witches who find it to be quite controversial and a little, like, disrespectful, because they feel like you're saying, oh, so I can't be a witch. Like, you won't call me a witch. Like,
But on a battlefield, like, what?
Right. So it's kind of up to what each individual wants to be called. But it's not the term that matters.
There's some people that still prefer the term mystic, or, like I said, I prefer druid, or whatever that looks like for you. But I think what we're trying to say is, don't be afraid to use the term witch, no matter your gender or lack thereof. Because even historically, even at the Pendle Witch era in Lancaster, UK, there were men witches that were killed. There were even animals that were killed because they were familiars involved in witchcraft, right? It just, like Sarah said, unfortunately happened a lot to women, because there were women that had backbones that, we stood up to the patriarchy, and that wasn't a good thing back then. Another common misconception about witchcraft is that it's all about casting curses and hexes. Some believe that witchcraft is predominantly about using curses or spells to harm others. But the reality of it is, many modern witches follow ethical guidelines, especially Wiccans that follow the Wiccan Rede. And it harm none, do what ye will, which discourages harmful magic. Witchcraft is more commonly used for self-improvement, healing, and protection. Once again, that kind of energy we talked about before, about focusing on spiritual growth and bringing in that ascension era.
I will also say about this, and this might be a little controversial, I personally don't believe in the threefold rule, and I also would say that a form of protection would be what I call a karma spell.
That's kind of how I feel, even regarding the threefold rule. I don't think the whole 3 times 3 thing is a thing, but we're just reaping what we sow. That is what it is. So we are calling upon justice. And in my practice, if I'm calling upon a karma spell, I am accessing that energy of the Holy Mother. Because, even in, kind of going off on a tangent here, but even in the story of Moses, when it talks about the Spirit of God or the spirit of death falling upon Egypt, killing all the firstborns, that isn't just a spirit of death. That is actually, if you translate it, that is the Holy Spirit. That is the mother. And she is not only a loving and nurturing mother, but she is a vengeful mother bear. You mess with her kids, you gonna get it. So that's who I call upon when I need that energy. It is fully biblical. If you actually read the Psalms, there are what biblical scholars call as imprecatory psalms. They're curses, honey. They're straight up curses.
Yeah. But the point is that's not all it is.
If you don't feel comfortable doing it, that's fine. There are many witches that do not practice that.
If love and light is your beat, then let it be your beat. That is just not my beat.
Mm-hmm.
I am more of the chaos karma, you get what you deserve. So, moving on, it kind of ties into what you were saying about calling on the Holy Spirit for those karma spells, is that witchcraft is not a single religion, right? Like, the misconception is that people assume that witchcraft is a religion. In reality, it is an extremely diverse practice with many different traditions, different practices, different beliefs, different religions. There's Wicca, traditional witchcraft, Satanism, folk magic, Christian magic, or Judaic magic. Like, witchcraft alone is not a religion. And that's, like, kind of what this podcast is all about, right? It's the intersection of where the two can meet and, like, how can you be a Christian and call yourself a witch?
The thing is with witchcraft is it can apply because it's a lifestyle. It's a form of lifestyle. You're bringing in the physical and connecting it to the spiritual. You're bringing in your intentions, right, with your actions and creating magic. And it can be used in any spirituality, any kind of religion. There are religions, as Sarah was saying, all over the world that practice witchcraft in some way or another. And if you are a witch, that doesn't mean you are a Wiccan. But if you are a Wiccan, that means you are a witch, right? Because in order to be a Wiccan, you need to practice witchcraft. But you don't have to be a Wiccan to just practice witchcraft. You can be whatever you want to be as a witch. So it is very universal. And even though there are some closed practices within witchcraft, there are plenty of open ones as well. And even with, like, druidry, which is something I follow, technically not associated, there is magic involved, but technically not, like, witchy, if that makes sense. However, there are people, I still use the term, I'm a druidic witch, something like that. And there are plenty of witches that find, once again, that intersection to fit in whatever their belief system is. Another big topic in witchcraft, moving forward with what magic looks like, using wands to cast spells. There's, the imagery we have popularized by media like Harry Potter. I think there was even a rumor years ago of, like, Jesus having a wand in some depictions and whatever. I don't know how true that was. So people automatically assume if you're a witch, you've got a wand. And I mean, yes, you can definitely use wands. I have had one in the past. I don't currently have one. But you can also use candles, herbs, crystals. You can even use your own finger or just your visualization or your mind's eye. All the wand does is, like, focus your energy. So for me, if I'm recommending someone to start out, like if they're coming to me asking for help in starting out in witchcraft, I usually recommend a wand because it helps really focus the energy on where you're going. It's a visual tool to point to what you're focusing on intentionally. But it's definitely not required. We do not need wands at all. There are many people that do not use them. The focus is intent and energy rather than the use of magical objects like we have portrayed in fiction.
It's important to remember that witchcraft is free. It
is so free.
It's fun to have crystals. It's fun to have tarot cards and other divination tools. It's fun to have all these candles and all these, like, fun decorative pieces on your, or even not decorative, but practical pieces on your altar. But it's just important to remember that, like, you don't need it. You don't need a wand. You don't need... I've heard this word used said many different ways. So if this is not the way you say it, I'm sorry. You don't need an athame.
Yeah, athame, yeah.
Yeah. You just need yourself.
You can have, if you want, all the wonderful luxurious tools, absolutely, by all means, have fun, waste your wallet. But the thing is, how did they practice thousands of years ago? They didn't have they didn't have, if you talk about European witches, they most likely did not have lapis lazuli or lapis lazuli that they, received from an import. Like, that doesn't happen.
Exactly.
But what did they have? Probably river rocks or, hagstones. Or maybe they were able to find a big chunk of salt or, something off the chalk bay. Or, it's about and it's also about having items that are sentimental and spark joy to you. Because that's magical in and of itself. And if that is an acorn, by all means, like, have at her. Witchcraft does not require it doesn't require any money at all. Actually, let me clarify that. It is 100% about intention. I know witches that to this day, they have not even lit one candle or one form of incense because they literally can't. They're not in a position where, they're in a living situation with incredibly sensitive people, or there's people with allergies. We always make that joke about, people being allergic to sage. It's just showing, like, it's all about intention. If that means drawing a fire on a piece of paper, cool. You're channeling the fire element. You're good.
Right. And I was going to ask, I studied this back when I first started witchcraft, but isn't also a wand one of the ways that people will kind of like call on the elements? Like, I know the athame is fire.
It's usually how it goes, at least in the Druid tradition. Or, like, there's kind of, like, Druid Wiccan that happens as well. Like, an athame is air, right? And the wand, it can be fire, but it also can be earth, right? Because you're connecting with the nature spirit of the actual... And then the candle would be fire or incense.
So, yeah, in that sense, like, I mean, I have always called on the elements. Every time I do a spell, I have something representing each element.
Yeah, me too.
But, like, again, that's not something that's, like, required, so.
Well, and I wrote a blog post about this eons ago as well, but you can even channel the Holy Mother through the elements, because if you read the Bible, she shows up in all four. Spirit of tongues, which is also the Holy Spirit fire, Holy Spirit baptism of water, and, she's literally Mother Earth. She helped form creation. And, of course, channeling the angels. Or even archangels that are in the elements. But once again, that is all intention, and you do not need to have any fancy candles or statues or anything like that. And if you do feel like you would like a wand, just go get a stick. That's what I did the first time I got my stick. You ask the tree or the dryad permission first. And check the energy. I usually get a stick that's already on the ground because then I know it's dried and it's not going to crack on me. And then sometimes I would burn it. I carve it out. I could even stain it, wrap it with some leather, have a fun craft day with it, or just keep a stick.
So last time we went to the Botanic Gardens here in Chicago, there was a stick shaped like a Y or like a fork that my husband found, and he took it home with him and named it Jeremy. And we joked that he was using it as a wand, and then we got home and my pink princess philodendron, one of my plants, just keeps growing, which is a good thing, but they're a trailing plant, but they also reach for the sun. So anyway, she wasn't very happy. So now Jeremy is holding up one of my plants.
Sometimes witchcraft is just bringing home a stick that you liked. That's
exactly.
That's witchcraft in a whole. And another misconception moving forward with that is that witches are solitary. It is often thought that witches always practice alone or in secret. And a lot of this probably stems from history, like us literally being cut off one by one. And also there's the misconception that you have to always belong to a coven too. But, covens do exist. Groups that come together for rituals, festivals, shared learning, community, and connection can be very important in witchcraft, but either way you see it, it's actually not really required either. If you're an Agatha all along girl and you want to have your coven sisters, you have at her. Absolutely. If that helps you grow and connects you further into that ability to love and to give and to learn from one another, totally channel that. But witches aren't solely solitary, but they're not solely in covens either.
Yeah. I actually consider myself a solitary witch. I don't think I could ever be in a true coven. Mostly because I feel like a lot of times coventry is very ceremonial. It doesn't have to be, but you write spells together, you perform the spells together. I am what I like to call a pantser. I do it by the seat of my pants. I sit down in front of my altar. I kind of have an idea of like what the herbs do, but I'll, throw in some cinnamon and some clove, and then I'll like kind of look and I'll see that like, oh, I didn't realize I had this herb. I'll throw it in. And that can't always work with a coven. So
I've been in a situation with chaos witches where, what we do is we usually will pick one aspect to the spell that we're doing if we are doing a ritual. And like, hey, you're really good at throwing random herbs together. You focus on that. I'm going to focus over on this, right? And then it kind of weaves together in this crazy chaos web thing.
Yeah.
So it's doable. It's difficult, but it's doable as long as you're communicating. But it's not for everybody. So
yeah.
So
and
no
the reason I brought that up is that just because you're a solitary witch doesn't mean you can't have a community.
Yeah.
And the same that just because you're in a coven doesn't mean you're not allowed to do your own solitary spells. Like if you have something personal going on your coven is there to be that community so that you can have that connection if you have something going on. But sometimes things are just so personal that, like, you don't even want to tell your best friends.
Or gods forbid, you miss out on the full moon ritual and you do something by yourself.
Right. Right.
I don't know of any covens that would punish you for that. But just to be clear. But, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, I actually do know a girl who is the self-appointed high priestess of her coven. I hope our podcast. I was gonna say, I hope our listeners can hear that eye roll.
I was rolling my eyes.
The eye roll of the slow blink. But yeah, she very much so. Like if you miss her full moon ritual, you are out of the coven. And that's not what it's about. So, don't be afraid to join a coven. Not all of them. Actually, most of them are not like that. But also don't be afraid to do it by yourself. It's all good.
You're going to be awesome. And that's another segue into this one is witchcraft being this ancient and unchanged practice, which of course we know is not the case because people may think that witchcraft is an ancient tradition that has remained exactly the same way throughout history, but we understand that it's evolved over time through oral tradition or, even removal of traditions, which happened to the Druids, right? We've basically, no one can know how to be an ancient Druid. Nobody. You just can't. It doesn't exist. That information doesn't exist anymore. And, witchcraft has evolved through influence of culture, geography, personal beliefs. Modern witchcraft is a blend of old and new practices, often shaped by individual practitioners. And, of course, Christian witchcraft. That's a major form of evolution in a big way because we have realized over time and through the amazing forms of technology that we have and the history that we've been able to study, that witchcraft is not demonized or antagonized in the Bible the way that we were taught, right? And we are walking proof that witchcraft can change and move and flow depending on the practitioner.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get more into that in a later podcast. Probably multiple podcasts, actually.
Probably a few of them, yeah.
Yeah. But that's one thing I love about witchcraft and about being in this community is that, it is chaotic, and like it can change and it can evolve, and like there's never an end to the learning because it's constant.
Because we're so focused on growth. We're focused on growth. And in order to grow, you've got to change things. You've got to let go of things. And you've also got to embrace new things. And that's why even just in the recent decades, we've come to realize, hey, you know what? We probably shouldn't keep doing the ritual that way. That's actually really appropriative. That's actually really, offensive to some cultures. So what do? We change that. Or even with white sage, we realize and recognize that that's incredibly appropriative, but it's also endangered. Like that poor plant is going to fade out of existence if we're not careful. So it's not worth it. There are so many other amazing herbs that we can use, and we have been able to grow from that idealization that that's the only thing we can use, because we keep looking out for more information. And it's like my favorite saying, which I'm sure you will hear me say time and time again on this podcast, is if you are not growing, you are dying. If you are not learning, you are dying.
Also, this goes back a little bit, but like when you were talking about like changing things and stuff, one of my favorite things to do just in life, because I'm just that person, is challenge things. Right?
Yeah.
Like I love, like I know people hate this type of person, but I will be the devil's advocate in like every situation. So yeah, like challenge even the stuff that we're teaching you.
Yeah. You got a problem with anything we're saying, let us know.
Yeah. I would love...
You may not agree, but we'll be willing to hear you out.
Exactly. So number 9 is a misconception that we kind of touched on a little bit. And it's this one's a little, it can be argued, I would say, that witches can control the weather or summon spirits. The misconception is that witches can control the elements, conjure spirits at will. The reality is that while many of us may work with the natural elements or engage in spiritual practices, we don't have the absolute power over the weather or to summon spirits, especially not in the like fantastical way that's often depicted in media, right? Like
we're not avatars over here. We're not
right, right. And
we're not water bending.
Yeah, and the thing is that like we absolutely can summon spirits, but only if they want to be summoned, right? Like we can't tell the spirit, let's go, like, come on, we want to talk to you. So that's what I mean with this point, is that while yes, it's not impossible, like Amber said, she knows someone who basically split tornado or hurricane?
Yeah, tornado.
It is possible. It's just not
Yeah, definitely not an absolute. Like, I myself have changed the weather. But in doing that, there were repercussions. Big repercussions, because that energy has to go somewhere. It has to, So I was messing a lot with the weather when I was tree planting, and I was making the rain go away, which was beneficial for me, beneficial for my team. We made a lot more money, and we would have been planting anyways, but we would have been a lot more comfortable in the sun. To the point where other people were noticing, and they started questioning me, because they're like, okay, you're the only one that professes witchcraft here. Are you the reason why this is the driest summer we've ever had? And I'm like, well, but what were the repercussions of that? Severe drought. And I learned the hard way that, you know what, when I'm messing with energy like that, I need to be careful, because I'm affecting people when I do that. Like, I was listening to a podcast once where a druid was talking about how he had sent a blizzard away. And what happened when he did that? Well, because he was able to fly. He was trying to protect his, airplane flight. God forbid he wasn't able to go on his plane. What happened? His sister wasn't able to go on the plane, because guess what? The blizzard went somewhere. It had to go somewhere. That energy just doesn't disappear. But I would also argue that it's not us that have that inherent control over the weather, right? Mm-hmm. I think when our will aligns with God, or when God's trying to teach us a lesson, like in my scenario, it's through, like, from a Christian witch standpoint, it is the power of Christ within us that does our magic. It is not ourselves. It is Christ within us, or the Holy Family within us. We in ourselves have our own essence, absolutely, our own chi, as we say. But, it's the Holy Spirit that's moving through us that, like Reiki, for example. It's not us healing. It is the energy of Reiki, the energy of God healing through us. So I would argue that, we don't have that absolute power over the weather. We don't. I cannot summon flame out of my hand. That would be really freaking cool, but I can't do that. And I don't know anybody that can.
Right.
But if we have faith to believe certain things can happen, like me stopping the rain or whatever that looks like, and it aligns with God's will, well then, hey, why the heck not?
Say who, because I don't know if they would want this information out there. But I actually know a witch earlier this year who was going through a breakup that involved some just righteous anger. And she caused a tornado to go above her ex-boyfriend's work.
Me, I won't go into it. But anyways, hubby and I took a little break, and I had permission, but I should not have tried to venture out there into the unknown. And there was quite righteous anger, and this person definitely deserved it. But I may or may not have, with my chaotic energy. Once again, that energy has to go somewhere. If you're not transmuting it, it's gonna go.
It's gonna go.
Right, and I remember you didn't
have a picture of it.
I remember you didn't even necessarily, like, summon the...
No.
Was it a tornado?
Yeah.
It was definitely, like, the season, right? Like, we were getting... Because I'm in an area where we can get things like that from time to time. And I just remember being so angry, and I was like, you know what? I am so tempted. Like, I am so tempted. And I didn't actively say, tornado appear, or nothing like that. I just was like,
right.
You know what would be freaking great right now? And I kind of accidentally manifested it.
Yeah. And he worked at a job that was outside and basically was...
ruined his day.
Yeah. So, and again, that, like you said, you didn't necessarily do it completely on purpose, but that righteous anger that you had and the Holy Spirit working through you, and in my opinion, for you.
Yep, probably.
Yeah. So that's just a fun little story about a certain witch I know.
Yeah, I've got a few of those stories. And that's the thing, too. You have to be, I would also say, like, be responsible for your energy. Because if you are a chaotic witch, where you can, like, for me, if I'm having a really bad day, my chaotic magic will start coming out to the point where, like, if I walk through a room, like, I could be nowhere near something, but I've got mugs falling out of cabinets halfway across the room. Like, stuff like that does happen all the time, to the point where if I am doing massive amounts of ritual, I've stepped outside and I've got, like, spinning clouds around my house. So if you are someone that has quite the dramatic footprint of energy, it is important to ground. It is important to transmute that energy, because Mother Earth welcomes that energy. She loves that energy, and she will transmute it into something beautiful. She literally takes our shit and turns it into fertilizer, okay? So she is the queen of transmutation, and it is important to ground if you do ever deal with things like that. But I also partially blame my Pentecostalism for, because it just, I grew up in this idealism, which I talked about in our first episode, of, like, crazy shit happens. It just does. It just happens. And I'm probably manifesting it because I just, it's there. But, and this leads to another misconception, too, is that witchcraft is solely about spells. You don't actually have to perform a spell to see something happen. You can just put the thought out there, just like I summoned a freaking tornado. Many people focus on this idea of spellcasting as the core of witchcraft, but there's so many different practices that are involved too. So if you're not a poet and you don't know how to write a pretty little ballad like Phoebe from Charmed, you know, there's so many things you can do: meditation, astrology, herbalism, divination, tarot, nature worship. All of this can be just as important as spell work. And also it's important not to limit yourself either, because I've noticed a trend in the newer community is that, you know, they take on the name as like, oh, I'm a crystal witch. And it's like, okay, you know, that's cool. It's awesome that you feel you have an inclination towards crystals. You have a strong understanding. Maybe you even feel empathy towards crystals, like all those kind of things. Very, very cool. But it is important not to limit yourself to that, because you're cutting off, once again, what energy you can grow and where you can develop, because the whole point of witchcraft is to keep growing and going. So if you cement yourself into a form of witchcraft, you may hinder your growth into developing into different areas. Just because you suck at poetry now doesn't mean you're always going to suck at poetry. You might suddenly get a woof of, I don't know what a woof is, but a woof of inspiration that, you know, or suddenly you're able to transmute your thoughts into words as you age, when you enter your crone era, whatever that looks like for you. There's always room to develop and grow, and you're not ever stuck in a certain area. We all have strength.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because one thing you said was that these things, you know, meditation, astrology, herbalism, divination, so on and so forth, you said that it can be more important, as important as spell work. I would say that it is more important than spell work. Because you, in my opinion, should not be doing spell work if you can't ground, if you can't worship nature, if you can't meditate. And I have a hard time meditating, so that's like coming from me. And these things, astrology can help you in your spell work, right? If you understand how astrology affects your spells, you can use that to add power to them. Same with herbalism. If you're just like, this, you know, I don't know what this does, but I'll throw it in this spell, it might not help you the way you think it is. So understanding, you know, the herbs that you're using is absolutely important.
You don't want to put too much belladonna in that tea.
Exactly. And when it comes to putting yourself in a box and limiting yourself, I will admit, when I first started out, whatever, 10, 15 years ago, I don't even know at this point, I did that to myself. I don't even remember now what I considered myself to be. I think I just called myself like a candle witch, because like all I was doing was like candle magic. And I didn't I was afraid of other things. And now that I have, and I would still consider myself what I usually say is that I practice witchcraft with a focus in astrology, herbology, and divination are my main things. But how limiting is it to think that that's all you could do?
Incredibly. And I know there's especially some trends in the Lord of the Rings community for witches, where we can tend to want to, if we're creating a name for ourselves, which is something that we should also talk about on a podcast regarding witchy names. But it's common for people to say, for a long time I was saying Avalon the Brown was my name, right? And so that's the idea that witches or wizards or whatever name you prefer, depending on their type of magic, their color magic, their association can change with their name. Which, I mean, if you pertain to that, that's awesome. I did for many years. A lot of people see divination and prophecy as like blue or purple. And like for me, I was doing animal magic, nature magic, home magic. So that's why I chose the term brown, right? And then there's, Gandalf the Grey, Gandalf the White. There's all those different things. If you pertain to that, that is awesome. But don't allow it to limit you either. So don't feel like, oh, if I am a blue witch, I cannot ever pertain to anything that an orange witch can. Like, don't allow that to limit you. And that's kind of part of why I shed that term myself, personally.
I didn't know that. I knew that you were Avalon the Brown, but I didn't realize... I kind of knew where it came from, but I wasn't sure why you shed it. I remember you telling me the story of how Hadassah came to be, but...
That's definitely something we can talk about in another podcast, but essentially I took it from Radagast the Brown, because he was like this animal, earthy, kind of kooky witch.
So anyway, moving on to the last point, which it actually kind of ties into the first point, funny enough, but the misconception is that witches are always involved in the occult or in like quote-unquote dark arts. There's a widespread belief that witchcraft is inherently linked to the occult in the pursuit of like forbidden knowledge. And while yes, we are pursuing knowledge, I don't know if it's taboo, but I'm hoping soon it won't be so taboo. But
I think we're getting there.
Yeah,
I think
we're getting definitely. So while some witches may explore occult subjects, most practice witchcraft as a form of personal empowerment, spiritual connection, or just straight up healing. For a while, I only did healing in my craft. So the dark arts portion of it is often associated with witchcraft are like small fractions. Like it is not, I mean, don't get me wrong. I have like 7 dead bugs, like chilling around me. I have taxidermy. I have a skull. Like,
I still wouldn't say that's dark arts.
well, no, I know, but like my dad, like
taboo, I guess.
Yeah, when my dad came to our house the first time, he hates taxidermy, and we have a little taxidermy duckling that looks like my cat has knocked down, and he was like, "What is this like?" He calls it woo woo. He's like, "What is this woo woo shit?" And I'm like, "Dad, this is nothing."
Love that for you. Love that for you. Like there are definitely witches out there. Absolutely. I know a few that are like way into the darker arts, right? And even dark, whatever. What is that term? That's such a relative term. But
I was like, "Do you want to see my vial of blood?"
Oh my god.
Definitely not all of us. Like there's, what we call the light workers, which I don't necessarily agree with, but like the ones that are all love and light and all of that kind of energy, which is, hey, like you said before, if that's your beat, you do you. But it is witchcraft, much like neurospiciness, is a spectrum. Like if you want to be the kind of witch that only does a little bit of this and a little bit of that, maybe all you do is stir your coffee in the morning and smoke a joint. Whatever that looks like for you, witchcraft is fully intentional. So if that's what your witchcraft is, great. If you're someone that is completely ceremonial, that like goes all out and wears the robes and like, has the moon shining down at the perfect lining up of your altar, whatever, that's great. If you want to be someone that delves right into the occult and finds out all the sigils of Solomon, or even further into like Hermeticism or whatever you want, it is fully what you make it.
Basically, this whole episode can be boiled down to don't let what other people think of you or your practice limit you.
Yep. Period. And don't let you limit you either.
Yeah, because like I was just talking to somebody who's going through a spiritual awakening about this, where she had a dream and it had a lot of like scary elements in the dream, and even she was like, but like I felt comfortable. And I'm like, yeah, you think they're scary because you've been told that they're scary, but they're not. Mm-hmm. So
we're not scary. We can be. That doesn't mean we are.
We certainly can be.
Yeah.
Well, thank you once again so much for tuning in with us here at Crossroads Coven Connections. And as always, if you have any questions or anything you want us to clarify or any suggestions, go ahead and leave them in the comments wherever you're streaming us, whether that be Spotify or Amazon or wherever. But thanks again for spending time with us here. And thank you, Sarah. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Amber.
Love y'all lots. Blessed be.
Blessed be.